Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Find and Follow podcast, where we are all about helping you find and follow Jesus in your everyday life. Co-host Jesse Richner, Kyle. Jesse, I don't know your middle name. Kyle Kingsley, Scott Langian, Jesse James.
I wish.
Kyle James.
I mean, that
Two
would
Jameses?
be amazing. No, it's Clayton, as a matter of fact.
Oh, I like that.
I like that too.
Yeah.
Jesse Clayton Richner.
That was my great-grandfather.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Great-grandfather. That's cool.
Scott Allen. Scott Allen over there.
Hands. All here present, accounted for on the podcast today.
Your middle name is Allen?
A-L-A-N. Don't give me the double L.
My dad's name was literally Scott Allen Richner.
No way.
Wow.
Wow, did not know
Yeah.
that.
Learn something new every day on the
Blowing
podcast.
my mind right now.
I'm sure he was a great dude with that
He
name.
was pretty great.
Yeah,
With
that's
that name.
awesome. Was he A-L-L-E-N though?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty common.
Yeah. Also, Alan Grant from Jurassic Park. You got that going for you.
I don't know that guy.
Yeah, you do.
I do?
He's like the main guy.
Oh, he's the
main
main
dude.
guy,
Yeah.
the
The
main
doctor.
scientist? Here's the news flash. I don't really retain a lot of movie stuff. A few quotes from movies in the 90s. People,
A few? You know, like all of Ace Ventura.
There's one caveat.
Like, this is not a few. Like, you can, like,
The only reason, and I've told you this before, the only reason was my little cousin Drew. Shout out to Drew if you're watching this.
what are the odds Drew's watching the podcast?
I'll send it to him.
Okay.
All right. When he was a little kid, stuck on Ace Ventura. That was his wheelhouse. He's probably, I don't know how, he's probably 8 years younger than me, maybe 10. I don't know. Anyways, when it came out, he watched it nonstop, literally memorized every single line, and then did an incredible impression when he was younger, like 10 years old or so. And we were on a family vacation. We were fishing. The fishing was real slow. So we would just be like, Drew, and we would say this scene, and he would do the whole scene, mannerisms, the voice, the face. It literally was uncanny. And so it has stuck around for,
That's not easy to do.
oh, yeah. And he would do the motions with his body.
Can he do Fire Marshal Bill, though?
I don't know how far out he ventured on,
On the Jim Carrey fandom.
but it was Ace Ventura. So when you spend like a week in a boat together fishing, and it's really slow fishing, you get,
You reenact. I mean, that's what I do every time there's a lull in conversation. I reenact Ace Ventura.
But plus, I mean,
I wouldn't mind that.
if you grew up in the 90s, Ace Ventura, Dumb and Dumber, like there was some classic Jim Carrey
Remember
stuff.
The Mask? Oh,
The
my
Mask?
gosh.
Yeah,
What a weird movie.
right?
Yeah.
Super weird.
So anyways,
So there you go.
and I'm named after his dad. He
Yeah.
was Dale Allen. So there you go.
There's lots of Allens.
Catching up with all the middle names. Here we go.
There you go.
Now, transition here to a big topic, though. Fruit. We're going to jump into fruit here, Matthew 7, Jesus. But what's your go-to fruit? And then, like, the big fruit debates. Like, is it a vegetable or a fruit? Tomato, avocado. Like, where are you putting those? Are those fruit, those vegetables? But, like, what are you guys' go-to fruits? You doing fruits and veggies? Where are you at?
Anything that has seeds is a fruit.
Is that the qualifier?
I think that's the actual definition.
So, tomatoes, 100% a fruit,
Yeah, like an avocado has a seed. It would be a fruit.
right?
So we're talking
are
like
berries fruit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Raspberry, blueberry.
Does a blueberry have a
blackberry.
seed?
tubers and stuff are not fruit.
Tuber?
Or like a carrot is not a fruit.
Tuber. Kyle's like, when you're at summer,
Yeah.
you're behind the boat,
Is it
I got
tubing?
A
tubers.
tuber?
Does a blueberry have a
A
seed?
potato would not be a fruit.
A potato. That's a starch.
Yeah, blueberry has a seed.
It does?
They're just small.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Learn something new. Yeah, tomato is a
It'd
fruit.
be really bad if the blueberry wasn't a berry, you know?
But
Yeah,
it's
no,
weird to
that's
call
what we
like
call
like a zucchini a fruit.
Is it?
Technically, I mean it has seeds.
It has seeds, but no way is that
But
in the
nobody's
fruit
like, hey, you
department.
want this fruit?
Yeah.
This zucchini fruit?
And why do we even have to classify them
Yeah,
all?
that's what I was saying,
There's
like,
fruits and vegetables. If you're eating any of those, you're doing pretty good in the food department,
You're
right?
good.
If you're splitting, hey, I don't know, can I eat more avocado? Is that a veggie or like a fruit? Like if you're doing more berries and zucchinis and spinach, you're doing just fine in the health department. I don't think I don't think that's our issue.
Is kale a fruit then? No. Oranges though are my
Okay.
What's your
my
go-to
all-time
orange?
favorite.
All time.
What do you mean?
Like what kind?
Like this
Just a
orange.
classic navel orange.
Yeah.
There's different oranges. There's
The
Cara.
round ones.
I
that
do
are
like the
orange.
little ones,
The
Yeah.
tangerine.
the cuties. You know,
Yeah. There's like mandarin.
Mandarin oranges,
There's
maybe.
yeah, isn't there even the versions of the smaller ones?
I like
Classic
good
orange.
orange. I like a
good old
orange.
navel orange.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My grandma, they lived in San Diego, and every December, her tangerine trees would get ripe. And it probably cost her $1 million back then, but she would ship a moving box size tangerines to our house. And so this was, mid 80s,
Say Ace Ventura and oranges.
early 90s. No, not oranges. They were tangerines.
Sorry.
They're not
I apologize.
they're not satsumas. They're not cuties. I get real
Wow.
offensive because it's tied to my grandma. right?
Okay,
And so
tangerines. The
grandma
tangerine
would
tree.
ship a box, sometimes two. Can you imagine what that cost back in
Well, back
'88?
there, it probably wasn't as
Was
bad.
shipping more back then?
Yeah.
I don't know. It seems like a lot. It seems like shipping's less. I guess maybe it's more now. Since we're shipping
Maybe it's just
everything
more
all the
common,
time.
yeah.
I just think of
More
Amazon. It's
efficient.
like it's free ship. Everyone's doing free shipping.
Yeah.
Grandma went down, picked them, went down to the post office, shipped them. We would get, and we'd have it basically the whole month of December. It was great.
I feel like this question is a little weighted towards me because you know
Is it?
that I'm not really a fruit guy.
No, I know, but you don't have to like all fruits. That's not the question. Was
Yeah.
just your go-to. If you're like gonna walk through the supermarket and
Yeah.
they have all the fruits, you're like, I'm just gonna pick one for a snack and leave. You're grabbing.
I'm going to apple. I mean, apple's pretty classic.
It's a classic fruit.
That's I was on a kick. I joked with my wife because I don't eat a lot of fruit. She eats a lot of fruit every time. Costco, she's got her big bags of berries and all of her things and grapes and strawberries and every time. And I don't really ever. I'll do the oranges, the small ones, the cuties are nice to peel. And I'm not a big full orange guy. I'm it takes all this effort in peeling it. And
What about nectarines?
oh man,
yeah, sure.
A
I
good
don't-
nectarine?
nectarine.
I don't
in
know.
season, right? Where
Can't-
juice is dripping down
Yep.
your face. You're like,
Can't tell you last time I had a nectarine.
oh, it's so good,
I feel like I'm sad right now.
dude. You get
I can't remember last time I had
We
fruit.
do a staff trip to Green Bluff and get some
Okay.
nectarines.
yeah. There's nothing that beats fruit or even vegetables in season.
Yeah.
When the strawberries are off the plant, or if it's apple in the fall, you go to Green Bluff, get a fresh apple. That tastes different. That's
Yeah,
built
for sure.
different.
It's like we're in the Shire.
Yeah,
Shire.
exactly. I'm a berry guy, so I mean, I like a really good raspberry or a blueberry. I love a good berry mixed, 4 or 5 berries. Somebody
Straight
brought
off the
one.
vine, though,
Nothing beats it.
it really, I mean,
I do remember growing up, my neighbor, our next door neighbor, a sweet old lady. I mean, when you're a kid, she was probably not that old, but she had huckleberry bushes in her backyard. And no? Raspberries.
that's debatable.
You can't cultivate
Okay,
huckleberries.
she had
They-
raspberries.
They could be blueberries or
No, it
really
was
hard to grow.
raspberries. I now remember,
the
'cause
red
then-
ones.
'cause
I know
then
you're
we-
colorblind, but blue and red.
Then we transplanted them, so my mom had raspberries for a while. But she would pick her raspberries and then she would make us jam and bring it over, and that was pretty good.
Yeah.
I remember as kids
Yeah, fruit jam.
the lady next door is bringing the jam.
We
again.
we do. I did freezer jam on a piece of toast this morning. There's nothing like fresh freezer jam.
Berries in the store, though, I mean, they're half as good as berries off the vine,
100%.
which is disappointing. I just wish I could have
Maybe you
that
should
flavor.
start a garden in your backyard. Grow some berries.
That
Yeah.
sounds
We've grown strawberries
Rewarding.
forever, and the ever-bearing ones, so they keep coming. But then once we had kids and a dog, you go out there to get it, and there would be none because they would just be out as little kids. Our kids are weird, I know this, but we've always had a garden, so they'll just go out and pick raw vegetables, beans and carrots. They'll pull them out of the ground, and they'll grab lettuce or spinach. They'll just eat it. They'll be out there eating, but then the berries too.
Eating dirt
No, vegetables, and then
that have been in the dirt.
a lot of dogs
it's
like
good
berries.
for you. You get the soil-borne organisms.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
get some. Yeah.
Probiotics?
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
that's not-
Yep,
something
it's
like
good
that.
gut health.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
good.
we should eat a little bit more of the healthy dirt and have a
Yeah,
little more
yeah.
organic stuff happening.
I should do that.
Well, we're deep into nutrition here on the podcast, but Jesus is jumping into it as a spiritual metaphor. If you've been following along, we're Matthew 7, about the middle. Back to huckleberries. You can't cultivate them. That's why they're so stinking expensive and rare. As far as I know, nobody's been able to farm them.
And they only grow above a certain altitude, right?
Yep.
Or
So
near
they're
a
high in
certain
the
I
altitude.
knew
mountains.
that was kind of a rare thing for our climate.
Yeah.
Wild huckleberries.
Yep. But there aren't, as far as I know, there aren't farms. You can't just go oh, we're gonna plant huckleberries here in my my garden. That's why they're
Even at the right,
$40 a pound or a quart or whatever.
like if you lived on a mountain, you couldn't
Yeah, like
cultivate
what about
huckleberry
if
bushes.
there's a bush there that's grown in the side of a mountain? Why couldn't you do that in your backyard that's on the side of a mountain? Doesn't make any sense to me.
I know.
We're gonna have to
Let's
look
see.
into this.
Somebody
Yeah.
Google that. I
Yeah.
have not heard of that.
Fact
like,
check the
somebody's
podcast.
lives above 4,000 feet and they are like got a huckleberry farm. I don't know of it.
What?
They're
I don't
they're
understand
very
how
rare.
that could not happen.
Maybe it's just one of those God things. You go, you know what? You guys aren't in
can't
charge.
take care of
This
this?
one, you're not going to be able to like make your own quote unquote and make it happen. So
I might have to Google fact check you on that.
okay, well, why don't we do that post podcast?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Probably a good idea. Well, let's jump in. Now that I want some berries and some good fruit.
I'm good.
Jesus.
Hold on.
Okay, I was trying to move us
I
forward.
googled it. It says there are 0 huckleberry farms. Most wild stands are unmanaged.
Oh man, I did not
0
believe you.
huckleberry farms.
Yeah, and now that's all I know. So don't ask me, well, why and how. I don't know, but there's something they've tried, but they can't cultivate it.
Yeah.
It just needs to
remember
be
hearing
wild. You can't. It's like a grizzly bear. You can't domesticate it. Okay, but they've put those in zoos, but that's bad.
Okay.
Anyways,
On to
now we know.
fruit
That's
bearing.
why it's really rare. Or if you get real, like we've gone plenty of times up in the mountains
Yeah.
and found them, and it's a ton of work to pick them, and they're very small, and you have to find the bush, and it's
I
a
feel
lot
like
of work.
if there were huckleberries in the ancient Near East, Jesus would have used them as a metaphor. Probably.
Yeah, because they're rare, hard to find. You can't
Mm-hmm.
cultivate it. It's just like something of God. Maybe that's what he's talking about because he doesn't. I mean, he gets into grapes here, but Jesus is jumping in. He's just talking about fruit, and I wanted to get there to just talk about how there's evidence, is what he's getting at. There is stuff you will see. It's not just lip service. You can't just say one thing and then your actions be something different, because you'll know if a bush in the garden or in the woods is growing the fruit, because the fruit will literally be there. It's not hard to find out. So,
Yeah, and Jesus, again, to your point, Jesse, Jesus used these farming metaphors and these very practical metaphors of the time and the season that were visible, that people understood, right? Like, you've seen these bushes, he talked about fig trees and used literally probably things that were right in front of him as like, you understand how this works in the physical world. Well, it also has a spiritual understanding in how that plays out in your life. I mean, Jesus did that all the time, that in a parable, or use these things that we understand to teach us things that are maybe harder to understand, or things that are spiritual that speak to a deeper level, and drew those connections.
yeah, and so he gives a warning here in verse 15. Watch out for false prophets, like to make sure we have the context that he's warning us against, and he's saying you'll be able to recognize this. There's false prophets, and they come at you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they're wolves. So they got this false front, this facade, this mask, this persona that is like, oh yeah, I'm with God and I'm for Jesus and I'm about the way of Jesus, but inwardly they're not. They're a wolf that is out to steal, kill, and destroy like the enemy. So what do you guys think of when you hear Jesus says, for today's context, like false prophets? Like, what do you guys think of? What are some things that we should be on the lookout for? How does that show up in our culture and in society? Things that will lead people astray, that we can recognize the fruit. Jesus is saying, hey, real prophets will have good fruit. Bad prophets will have bad fruit. That's how you'll know. So help us with, how do we recognize them? How do we see them today? How do we get past the sheep and berry and fruit metaphor into saying, oh, this is what Jesus was talking about. Here's a false prophet. This is something I should be warned against.
I think this is something that's becoming more prominent, or maybe it's just that we're noticing. But I mean, without saying names, the rise and fall of a lot of megachurch pastors, comes to mind for me. And yeah, you will know them by their fruit. And a lot of things have come to light. And think what you will of it. And I think a lot of people are maybe not paying attention, but I am. And I think to myself that it is time to begin to better vet our church leaders in terms of like what they're doing and what they're producing. And sometimes you don't know until it's too late, I suppose. But I feel like, again, I'm not going to like name names, but I feel like a lot of those instances before it happened, I could say like, there's trouble brewing here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. How do you know? Because it's easier on like kind of the post. Like if someone goes to jail,
right?
And it, it's like, oh hey, but how do we not know, or do we know? What are some of those things you're like?
Yeah, because we so quickly dismiss. I think we're quick to dismiss things that should be red flags, and that to me is problematic.
Yeah, and I think I found this interesting, this insight that the way that Jesus is laying it out here is he doesn't even really, he talks about this, he starts this thing out with the false prophets and what they're saying. So the message is out there that he's saying, someone's speaking something that's not true. They're saying something that's false. But he doesn't even really say you're testing what they're saying. You're testing the fruit that's in their lives. Like that's what should be put to the test. And so I think, Jesse, like what you're saying, that's what I tend to think of these people who, I think often we look at fruit the wrong way. Or like these mega churches or these really influential people, look at all the fruit they're bearing. People are coming to Jesus. Their church is doing amazing things. They're reaching the poor and the widows and the broken and the orphans, and this is what Jesus said. But the fruit of their life is wreaking havoc, and they have broken relationships, and they're doing all these things behind the scenes that are red flags that we're dismissing because of this quote unquote. I'm doing air quotes for those who can't see.
Doing one air quote.
these quote unquote the fruit, and so we dismiss these things because there's fruit, and we look at this and go, no, they're obviously not a false prophet. They're obviously not doing these bad things because they have fruit, but the fruit of their lives is when you
Love.
look into it.
Joy,
Yeah.
peace, patience,
And
big
then
churches, notoriety, fame, popularity on
Yeah,
social media, large following
Yeah.
on Instagram.
That's
And
what I was going to say. Is the fruit turns
recognizable
out to be
books.
not fruit? It wasn't bearing fruit at all.
Yeah.
Because then when things fall apart, all of these people come out of the woodwork and say, "No, there was no fruit here. I was hurt. I was broken. Like all of these people washed
Yeah.
out. Like all of this stuff comes to light."
And you look at the personal thing, and the fruit that's really happening in their life is anger and bitterness and resentment and pride and all of these things that, again, are red flags. And it's so easy in hindsight, like you say, to look back and see that. And I think the dangerous thing is we read this and we look at those people, right? Even your question, like, how do we identify those people? I think Jesus' point is like, hey, are you looking at yourself and what fruit are you bearing? Not like, oh, I got more money in the bank and my house is bigger and all these kind of things. Like that's really easy to project that as the fruit. But then I look at my life, am I bearing these things, and there's really specific places where we talk about this is what the fruit of the Spirit looks like. Is there joy and peace and patience and self-control in your life? Or are you really like, you're angry and you're prideful and you have a lack of self-control and addiction and all these kind of things? And in hindsight, that's what we're seeing with these, and I hate like going like, oh, look at this person. They were a false prophet because of that. I mean,
it feels like such harsh language.
Yeah, and we just got done talking about
and people might be listening and go, well, what about you guys?
Yeah,
'Cause
exactly.
Yeah.
You guys are talking, you're teaching, I'm listening to your podcast. Let's look at the fruit of your
Yep.
lives. And I think you're spot on, Kyle, with what we automatically think of what Jesus is saying is fruit. And he's going, oh, no. That's not what I'm talking about. The big name, the platform, the notoriety, the multi-book deal, the go on and on.
Yeah.
Like, that's fruit. In and of itself, not bad, but that's not what he's talking about.
Yep.
I think he's talking
Yep.
about our character, because in context, like, remember we just talked about don't be anxious.
Yeah.
If you're a person who is leading people towards a worrisome, anxious life, Jesus would be like, time out. Let's look at the fruit of their life. They say God says don't worry, but then they're a worrier. That's, where's their peace that is, Christ in them? Where's their self-control? Are they just one prone to quick-tempered breaks? Or where's their humility? I heard somebody recently, and it was one of Dave Ramsey's personalities. He was just talking about, he's new to the team last couple of years.
When you said Dave Ramsey's personalities, I immediately thought like, oh, Dave Ramsey's got split personality. And it's like, hey, this is Dave. Oh, hi, I'm Bruce. Like,
that's what they call their public people. They got
one
a team
of Dave's
people.
team members.
Yeah, who's a public person. He's got a book.
So
right?
he has
got
a personality.
That's what they call him. Dave
Okay,
Ramsey.
so one of Dave's
team members. Who's a public personality.
Okay.
Kind of like what we're talking about. Someone who's maybe a little more known as a public teacher. on mental health. Anyways, he was saying when he interviewed for the job and coming on the team, he's in his 40s, mental health, couple PhDs. He's a smart dude. One of the things that he really appreciated that he could work for Dave was Dave, in the midst of all of that, he had a team of people around him, people outside of the company that were like mentors, friends, people that would help, he would listen to, take advice from. So there was like a humility there versus I own a kingdom and I'm at the top. Nobody could tell me no. Everybody tells me yes. I mean, I think that's one of those warning signs I think of is like the lack of humility. And one of the ways that shows up as fruit is like, oh, I have connection outside of my church, organization, company, and I listen to people and they have like a voice into my life. If there's nobody that speaks into your life and you just think you own your own little kingdom, that's not going to bear good fruit because you got an arrogance and a lack of humility. That would be a warning sign for a false teacher. Like, who do you run this by? You know, and sometimes it's hard to know unless you really know people and get close to them.
Yeah.
And it comes out later sometimes in the rising and the falling of things where it's, oh, they didn't listen to anybody.
And it's
I just think it's important to put this in context and back to what we talked about last week and in the context of because I can hear the rebuttal. Well, who are you to judge? Right? Like we're saying these things and we're talking about this and Jesus is telling us to beware. And he started chapter 7 with, hey, don't judge. And we talked about the complexities of that and the nuances of, hey, then he does kind of tell us that we are supposed to judge.
Yeah, not kinda. He totally does.
Yeah, then he tells us that we are supposed to judge. So understanding this, like, don't judge and then judge people's fruit.
Yeah, verse 20, thus by their fruit you will recognize them.
Yeah.
You can look at the outward part of their life. Again, go back to the Judge Jesus series. We have a tendency to judge the inward, and we think that we know people's hearts. And then we not only judge, but we try to sentence and execute and follow through. But Jesus is saying, look on the outside.
Yep.
Are there a person that is quick-tempered and raging? You can look at that and recognize they got some issues on the inside because that's coming out of their heart.
Yeah. And so understanding that in this context, but our appropriate response in setting our heart in a humble position of, like, I really do care about people and where they're headed and what they're doing and the fruit of their lives. Like, not like I just want, because I think where Christians and religious people get this wrong all the time is that we do sit in this seat of judgment in Jesus' role. And again, see all the other conversations we've had about this. And we go, yeah, that person's terrible. I mean, type in any popular person who speaks the gospel, preacher, pastor, whatever, in YouTube, the next thing that's going to come after their name is false teacher.
And we're not even popular, but this came up last week, and then I sent Jesse the link of when the Spokane street preachers were protesting Maryview Chapel and sent him the YouTube video that's still out there.
Because we're false teachers.
We're false teachers. We preach too much grace.
Yeah.
We don't hold people accountable enough was kind of like the main message. So too much like grace of Jesus, too much love, everybody.
Yeah, I think you have to hold those things in tension. Judgment should be restorative in our context. Like we are not,
That's good.
We're not judging people for the sake of condemnation exclusively, but in hopes that we can bring them to a place of restoration where they can then be healthy, right?
So that there is fruit, that there is good fruit, that we want to see that, and we want a world full of peace and joy and trust in Jesus and all that kind of stuff. Way too often, and I think the extreme part of that I see way too frequently is, no, I just want to point out how wrong people are because I want to be right, and I want you to know that this person's a terrible person. Like, what good is that? Other than you have more views on your YouTube channel and you're an angry person yourself. Like,
but that's essentially what the internet has become.
yes,
Like,
it's frustrating. I watch a lot of messages, obviously, and pastors and preachers and context and get help for things we do, and it's just you'll get stuck in a hole of like, I like this guy and I think he's got good theology, and I look at the fruit and I'm like, I really appreciate what he's saying. He's handling the biblical text well. And then the link on the next video over here is, this guy's a terrible person and he didn't say this one thing about hell right, and I disagree with him from the Bible, and he's a dummy. I'm like, cool.
Well, freedom of speech, I guess. But Jesse, I think you hit it on the head there.
Yeah.
Like if we're coming with a restorative help approach, that's different. And I say those two words to say, judging, right? A restorative help. That's how I want to be treated. And if we approach, I don't know, others the way I want to be treated, treat them as you want to be treated.
There you go.
And is if I'm parenting and as a dad, I'm being, because I love my kids and I want my boys to grow up and be strong men, but maybe I'm too harsh, too aggressive, too intense at times, and so I want people around me, my wife included, and even at times where she doesn't feel like I want her help, I want other people to be like, hey, let me see, I see something on the outside here. Let me help you. I want to make sure you're on the right track of following Jesus and like raising your kids. I want some restorative help, some course correction. I don't want to go down a pathway for years or decades and then it be just, even worse consequences. So that's what Jesus is getting at. And he's saying and we're talking within the Christian circle here, within church, within people who claim to follow Jesus. He's saying there's going to be some folks who like, but Jesus, I did this, and Jesus, I gave that, and Jesus. We didn't know each other. I didn't know you. There wasn't the real fruit that needed to be inside in a transformative life because of the Holy Spirit at work in your heart. And it's pretty severe. And that's one of these passages we kind of, at times as teachers, you're like, well, let's kind of skip forward here. Let's kind of hit the high, good parts. And Jesus going, I don't know you. Away from me, you evildoers. And that's hard to settle into, like Jesus would say that to someone, but
Yeah.
he will.
Yeah, and verse 21 really is a continuation of the previous thought, that starts at 15. Beware of false prophets. Are they bearing fruit or are they not bearing fruit? Then he continues to say, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. And I think he's going back to his previous statement. He's saying, there are people who will do things in my name that are not genuinely doing them in my name. That's just such a tough reality for us to think about, to face, that there are people, there are pastors, there are leaders, there are prophetic voices, and I put that in quotes, prophetic voices in the world that are not genuinely of God. And how do we discern and then approach and find a place that has truth? It's like, how do we discern between the false voices out there and that that's authentic? Like, that's a tough task, right?
Yeah.
By their fruit.
By the fruit. You
Yeah.
look at the outward, and then sometimes it's still kind of tricky. And was it 1 Corinthians? I was just trying to scan where Paul, in the chaos sometimes of church, they're like, hey, we all have the Holy Spirit. Kyle, you were just talking about this on Sunday. Like, we all have the same connection to Jesus, and so we all have the Holy Spirit to discern what's the spirit in which people are testing. We should pray. We should get 2 or 3 of us together. We should reason it out. We should evaluate. We should do our due diligence, if you will, on who's this teacher and what are they teaching. And
I think a lot of times in our tradition, whatever you want to call this, like charismatic, but even just in evangelicalism, people overlook things because someone is dynamic, they're magnetic, they're growing something. And so you just overlook the rotten fruit. It's like,
and again,
they're bringing a lot of people in.
That's what I was trying to get at the beginning, is what we define as fruit. And I think it's specifically, as we get on into history, how we define success, how we define all of these things with numbers and money and status and following. And we're like, well, they have to be doing something right. There's so much fruit. Like, God is blessing their ministry. God is blessing their family. God is blessing their workplace, whatever it is. That's the fruit. And I think we misqualify what Jesus is talking about here with the fruit of our lives. And when he's talking contextually with some of the things that Paul unpacks later in his letters of what this fruit is, that the Spirit bears, is we misqualify it all the time. And we say that person must be really successful and God must be backing them because, I talked about this a while ago when I talked about this idea of blessing. And we're like, well, we look at blessing and we're like, yeah, this person's rich and they're a millionaire and they're a terrible person. Why would God give them millions of dollars? Why would God bless them? That's fruit. And we look at it all wrong.
I was meeting somebody a couple weeks ago, and they were like just right on time, but just maybe a couple minutes late. And
so they were right on time, or they were
going to be right on time, but they got stuck at the train. And so in light of that conversation, they were joking, but they're like, #not blessed.
Yeah.
Because they were stuck at the train down by the freeway, and they're like, yeah, God must not be blessing me. And you agree, disagree. You're not saying, hey, anything that's big, or flashy or famous or somebody with a platform is automatically a false teacher or evildoer.
Not even close.
Yeah. It's just that isn't an indicator of like good teacher or bad teacher. If you have something small, you must be a false teacher because it's not happening. Or if you have something big, there's so much other fruit. That's a byproduct.
Absolutely.
And then God does stuff that's just God's sovereignty. He makes stuff grow. And it's not in our control to make stuff grow.
Yeah, because then there's some people who hate, and again, this is where I look at the YouTube comments and the angry Christians and the things. It's like there's people who hate quote unquote mega churches, and however you define that, some people think we're too big of a church, right? Whatever.
Right.
And I'm probably like on one end of like I think mega churches and giant churches are flipping awesome because they're reaching a lot of people, and like I think that a healthy church should grow and reach more people and do stuff. I just think that we define it in these terms sometimes of like, well, look how good of a pastor this person is, or look how good of a mom this lady is because, she's got all the nice things or whatever it is. We look at some of these things and misqualify really getting down to what fruit are you producing the way that Jesus would call you to? And I think as we talk about this, it makes me look inward and it makes me not look at those people, but go, yeah, what is really the fruit of what God's doing in my life in all of these areas that I can overlook or like we do in other people. Like, oh, no, like for me, how is God bearing fruit in my life?
We should get more excited, enamored, maybe even envious, probably not, but about the fruit of other people's lives, like the amount of peace they have, the joy they have, the amount of self-control. We should be really like in awe of that person has so much self-control. And we get so infatuated with that person's so famous. They have a platform. They have like a reach, and that's what we're striving for. They have status. They have money. They have whatever. And I think God would be okay. Could be wrong on this. Be okay if we're a little more envious of like, they got so much gentleness in their life. Like, I love that. I want more of the fruit of the Spirit in my own heart. I want to be like them in their gentleness. I don't find myself with that on a daily basis going, you know what I mean? Just in awe of the fruit of the Spirit in that person's life. And then Jesus wraps it up, and I'm going to try to land the plane here on the Beatitudes for us with being a builder. And he, again, using a real practical metaphor. I don't know. Do you guys know historically, like, there's probably a lot of folks who, like, built their own house, more so than today, or, like, reconstructed, or there wasn't subdivision plots that they just like rolled into. It was, so they really more understood even in a practical sense of where their food came from. They had to raise some sheep. They had to have a garden, pick some vegetables and fruit. They had to build their own, walls, construct their own residence and whatever they got going on. And he's saying, hey, be wise. Put everything I'm saying into practice. That's like a person who builds on rock on a solid foundation versus someone who builds on sand. It's not gonna hold the weight of your life if you're building that. And that's Jesus is saying, don't just have a theory, don't just sit around and think about this stuff, but actually put it into practice.
Yeah, and he's kind of furthering the continual context of the division of, good, bad, wise, foolish, false, real. He is really drawing a line and talking about these things, and this kind of just further makes his point and talks about this in wise and foolish. And both groups are shown as hearing the same thing. They both have the same access. They both have the same thing. The difference is the fruit, is the putting them into practice. That's what Jesus is getting at. So he uses a different metaphor, continuing down his same line of thinking with this division between wise and foolish. Like, here's the differentiator. It's not, well, they had different access or they, went different places. No, they put the things into practice that they heard, and the foolish people didn't bear fruit with it.
Yeah, he's not trying to trick anyone. It's not a secret. He's saying, hey, listen to what I say. If you act on what I say and do these things that I'm teaching you, you are like a wise person who built a sturdy house. And if you ignore them, you're foolish. Like, he's given us the formula, essentially. Like, here it is, you guys. Like, go and do it.
And the concluding part of it is this kind of demand to consider not just what we say, but what we do, right? That's at the end. Wrapping it all up. It's like, yeah, you could say, Lord, Lord, you could say all the right things. You can know the answers to all the, Bible trivia questions. You can grow up in Sunday school. You can do all these things. You can put on the right face. But if you're not doing the things, then it's not real. It's not real fruit. It's false. It's a false teacher, and there's consequences, and there is a separation there, and it's based on the action of what we do with what we profess.
Yeah, and if you just think about all the stuff he's talked about, if it's like you're going to build your life on fame and fortune, self-reliance, being stingy, having a hatred of people, having a worry, having a judgmental, condemning spirit towards other people, is that what you're going to build your life on? And most of us don't intentionally go, yep, absolutely. That's what I set out to do 20 years ago or today when I woke up, is like, I'm going to have more hatred and be stingy. But he's saying if you don't follow the way of Jesus, if you don't actually put them into practice and live from the grace and mercy that we have received from Christ and the forgiveness, and by producing letting the Holy Spirit produce the fruit of loving people and not worrying and settling into the peace that is Christ, and generosity and self-control and kindness, and helping other people through a heart of, let me look at your fruit, let me help you. I want to work on my own heart too, and store up treasures in heaven, and not put my faith in my 401k and retirement, and the equity that's in my house, which last few years has gotten crazy. You're like, oh man, we're rich, we're doing something, we're like confident in ourselves. Like, really? Jesus would say that's not where you should build your life. That's a slippery slope. Well, he doesn't say slippery slope, he says sand.
Or even like his point just being, if you hear these things, and I think the more common thing in our culture now is, now that's not the right way. The way of Jesus just, I'm out. It sounded good, but I would much rather treat people the way I think they deserve to be treated, rather than the way that Jesus treated me by dying for me. Now I'd much rather work on myself and build a name for myself. I'd much rather love myself, not put myself at the back of the line. Those types of things. We go, yeah, I mean, I heard it, I get it, I heard the message, but that just no, it's not. I'm gonna do my way, right? I'm gonna believe my things, and we build our life on that, or a false idea.
Yeah, it takes intentionality and continual submission to Jesus, because the human proclivity, honestly, is not to live this way. Like, you look at human history, and it is a vast demonstration that people do not live like Jesus taught without intentionality and without the Holy Spirit, honestly. And like that's where that continual submission comes from, that we can be sanctified and then begin to live differently. But I think it's so easy to do lip service to the gospel and say that, yes, we are followers of Jesus, and not live that out in any authentic way. And of course, I'm speaking to us here sitting in this room as well. Like, that is the perennial struggle, to say I'm a follower of Jesus, but then bear no fruit in our lives. Like, it happens. I think it happens more often than we would care to admit, which is unfortunate. And that is the human condition, right? Paul tells us that, like, we are inclined to sin, not to live like Jesus. So it takes the intentionality of continual submission and surrender and prayer and thoughtfulness and habit formation in order to live like this, in order to bear fruit. We have to be intentional about it.
Mm-hmm. We have to submit so we can be transformed, be restored initially and be transformed day after day. And, we can take a cue from the people who heard firsthand, verse 28, the people who were on the mountainside with Jesus hearing all of this. When he had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority. He had this divine authority. He's God in human flesh. He sat down and is different than their teachers of the law, people that were teaching him that day. And they were stunned. And then as we, like Kyle, you said, we sit here today and go, not so great. He's a mediocre teacher. My challenge for anybody all the time is, if you want to choose your own way, that's fine. You're an adult. You're a person. You can choose your own way. Just literally choose your own way. What would your life look like if you didn't use anything from Jesus? So don't use anything from Jesus. Don't steal from him and his way of life. Don't cherry pick a few nuggets here and there, mix that in with something else. What would your life look like? What would all of society and culture look like if it was entirely void of all of the way of Jesus? Choose that way. Go for it. Great. But don't say, I'm doing my own thing, and then you're picking half of Jesus' stuff, because that's not you. That is plagiarism. If you wrote a paper for school and you stole half of it from other articles and all the research from other people, and you gave no credit, and you said, this is my work, we wouldn't tolerate that. So I get real fired up when people are like, oh, I'm going to do my own thing. Oh, no, you should love others like they love you, and you should like have kindness and gentleness and self-control. Okay. Well, you're going to just steal half of God's or three-quarter God's stuff, but not. You're going to take all the credit.
A lot of argument to that would be, well, it's not exclusively a Jesus thing. It's not a God thing. You know, there's other people who said those things. There's, you know, other ways to do it, and they take Jesus out of those things, right? I think that's a popular argument I've heard. It's like, yeah, well, I mean, and we look to it, and we void Jesus of the Jesus things, right? This is something you are passionate about. People stealing from, plagiarizing from God. Scott does this all the time with movies. He's like, that's a Jesus thing. Like,
yeah,
yep, that's...
Because it goes to the next question, like, oh, I'm just going to disregard Jesus because other people said it. Well, then we have to disregard Jesus as God and King of the universe and creator of all things. So everything good and holy and perfect is from God. So then it gets us into the next conversation. It's like, oh, he's not really God. Okay, now we're into the real meat of it.
I think that's what happens. You get a truncated Jesus. You know, it's like, well, Jesus was a good moral teacher, and we can take that from him. But that's about it. You know, the whole reconciling all things to himself, fixing the cosmos, not that. But yeah, he was a good moral teacher, so we can take that from him.
Yeah. Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, and then like we can talk about that. Like, no, it's not. God didn't create the earth, the people in it, the way. No, not his. Okay, now we're into the real meat of where you're at with life and where do we come from? What are we doing while we're here? Where do we go when we're done? Now we're into it. So
I think that's from Cotton Eye Joe. Where did you come from? Where did you go?
Yeah, but I mean, yeah.
We should write a new song.
About Jesus?
Yeah, let's
did
flip
did the Cotton Eye Joe song, did they plagiarize from Jesus too?
I don't know. I'd have to look at the lyrics. But we could write a new song with some that kind of gets into this. That would be good. Nothing like a good catchy jingle to stick around.
But Matthew is, like you say, he's kind of closing out the Beatitudes, but this concluding remark is a little bit unique for him in there, but I think it's a really good segue and launching point for what he's about to do next, because he talks through this idea that, Jesus, and you say the crowd noticed this, what he did, who he was notable, and it demanded a response. That's what Jesus just got done saying, right? It demands a response. You're hearing these things, and now there's a response needed of you, and how you act is going to be that response. And then the next few chapters Matthew's going to go into are going to show the same authority of Jesus, not just in what he says, but what he does. So he's not just a guy who says these things. Like, he proves it. Like, I am who I say I am.
It's a good point. It's not like he preached a nice sermon and they, it's like, okay, this demanded that they thought deeply about what Jesus had taught and responded to it in a certain way. It wasn't like this was a nice teaching, and continue with their lives. Like, no, this is someone who teaches with authority. Yep. This is someone that's different.
They noticed this authority. Obviously, there's a spiritual aspect of that too. I mean, seeing God in the flesh and understanding this spiritual dynamic there. But then he goes on to prove it with what he does and who he is. And then, so I could only imagine people going, okay, yep, this is the thing. And that's my story. I'm like, yeah, this Jesus thing is legit. He is who he said he is. It's worth my life following, and my actions are going to prove that.
I would almost say it's too legit.
Too legit to build your house on the sand.
As we quit this podcast, that's a great segue. Is the Jesus that's high on the mountaintop the teacher one, just a bunch of hot air and talk? Or is the Jesus that's down in the valley with the people the same Jesus doing the things he talked about?
Stay tuned for next week's episode.
We'll see you then. Have a great week following Jesus.